This 1915 portrait of a miner's family looks ordinary until you see the tag on his jacket. At first glance, it is just another working family posed outside their home. The kind of image you might scroll past in a digital archive without a second thought. But Sarah Kendrick, an archivist at a West Virginia historical society, could not look away from it. She found the photograph in a donation box that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, the estate of a former mining superintendent's grandson. Hundreds of images decumped unceremoniously into cardboard boxes with no inventory, no labels, just decades of dust and the faint smell of mildew. Sarah had been processing collections like this for 11 years. She knew what to expect. Family portraits, company picnics, mine entrances, the usual visual record of Appalachian coal country in the early 20th century. This photograph measured 8 by 10 inches, mounted on thick cardboard backing that had yellowed at the edges. A man stood in the center, still wearing his work clothes. Coal dust darkened the creases of his trousers. His wife stood to his left in a plain cotton dress, her hand resting on the shoulder of a small boy, perhaps 5 years old. Behind them, the weathered clapboard of a company house, standard company housing, identical to 100 others that once lined the hollows of McDowell County. Sarah set the photo on her light table and leaned in closer. The man's expression struck her first. Not quite resignation, but something close to it. A stillness in his eyes that felt different from the usual stiffness of early photography. His jacket hung open, dark wool, worn at the elbows, and there, pinned just above his left breast pocket, a small metal tag caught the light. She adjusted the angle of her desk lamp. The tag was rectangular, perhaps 2 inches across, stamped with numbers. 3847. The metal looked like brass or tin, deliberately affixed with what appeared to be a rivet through the fabric, not a decorative element, not a badge of honor or union membership, something else entirely. Sarah turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded pencil, Hewitt family, number 12 camp, spring 1915. Nothing more. No photographer's mark, no names beyond the surname. But that tag would not leave her alone. She had worked with mining photographs for over a decade, processed thousands of images documenting the coal fields. She knew the visual language of these communities, the pride in Sunday clothes, the exhaustion in candid shots underground, the formal stiffness of company portraits. But she had never seen a tag like this sewn directly onto a worker's everyday clothing. Not in any archive, any collection, any exhibition she had ever encountered. She photographed the image with her digital camera, imported it to her computer, and zoomed in until the numbers filled her screen. Definitely 3847, 4 digits stamped into metal, pinned to a man as if he were inventory. And once she saw it, really saw it, she could not pretend it was anything innocent. Sarah Kendrick came to archival work through a circuitous route. A history degree from Marshall University, 2 years teaching high school in Charleston, then a return to graduate school for library science, when she realized she wanted to work with primary sources rather than textbooks. She specialized in Appalachian labor history. Her thesis examined oral histories of black miners in the southern West Virginia coal fields, voices that had been systematically excluded from official company records. She understood how photographs lied, how images commissioned by coal companies framed workers as content, productive, grateful for employment, how family portraits could be staged to project stability and satisfaction even when hunger and debt defined daily life. But this photograph felt different. It was not a company portrait. The composition was too informal, the setting too humble. This looked like a personal photograph, perhaps taken by a traveling photographer who moved through the camps offering portraits to families. She pulled the photograph from its mounting board with practiced care, using a thin palette knife to separate the print from decades-old adhesive. On the reverse side of the print itself, she found a small stamp, R. Morrison, Welch, W.V. A studio photographer then, someone working independently, not on company payroll. She made notes in her research log, the tag, the numbers, the camp designation, the date. She felt the familiar pull of a story that needed excavation. Not just curiosity now, but something closer to responsibility. If she filed this photograph away with a generic description, mining family, circa 1915, she would be complicit in whatever silence the image held. She had spent her career trying to recover voices that power had tried to erase. This felt like one of those moments where she could choose to look closer or choose to look away. Sarah started with the basics. R. Morrison proved easy to trace. City directories from Welch listed him as a portrait photographer operating from a studio on McDowell Street between 1912 and 1923. Local newspaper advertisements showed he traveled to mining camps throughout the county, offering family portraits at reduced rates, $2 for a sitting, an additional $1 for extra prints. Affordable enough for miners' families, but still a luxury that required saving. She searched for the Hewitt surname in census records. In 1920, she found a James Hewitt coal miner living in McDowell County with his wife Clara and son Thomas. The ages matched, the location matched. She made a note. Next, she looked into the number 12 camp designation. Company camps in southern West Virginia were typically numbered rather than named, particularly in the early decades of the 20th century. She cross-referenced mining operation records held at the state archives. Number 12 belonged to the Pocahontas Fuel Company, a subsidiary of a larger Norfolk-based corporation. The camp sat in a narrow hollow 3 miles from Welch, accessible only by a company-owned spur line of the Norfolk and Western Railway. Property records showed the Pocahontas Fuel Company owned not just the mine but every structure in the camp: the houses, the school, the church, the commissary. Even the land the cemetery occupied belonged to the company. She found James Hewitt's name in a mine payroll ledger from 1915, one of hundreds of miners employed at the number 12 operation. His position, loader. His daily wage, $2.60, well below the regional average for skilled miners. She noted the discrepancy. At this point, Sarah called in a colleague. Martin Reeves taught labor history at a small liberal arts college 2 hours north. He had published extensively on the script system in company stores in the coal fields. She sent him a high-resolution scan of the photograph and asked if he recognized the tag. Martin called her back within an hour. His voice had an edge she had not heard before. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Estate donation. Why?" "Because I have been looking for photographic evidence of these tags for 15 years. He explained that company stores in the southern coalfields operated through a script system. Miners were paid not in U.S. currency, but in company-issued tokens, redeemable only at the company commissary. The practice was legal, profitable, and nearly universal across the region. Prices at the commissary ran 20 to 40% higher than at independent stores in nearby towns. But miners had little choice. Most camps were geographically isolated. Travel to external markets required time and money that families barely had, and companies made it clear that shopping elsewhere was viewed as disloyalty. But the tag system, Martin said, was something else entirely. It was debt identification, he told her. If a miner's account at the company store exceeded a certain threshold, usually $50, the company issued a numbered tag. The miner had to wear it at all times while in camp. It marked him as indebted, as company property, essentially, until the debt was paid. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "You're saying this tag means James Hewitt owed the company money?" "Not just owed, was owned by that debt. Because here's the thing about scrip wages. You couldn't save your way out. Every payday, the company deducted your store debt from your wages before issuing scrip for the remainder. But basic living expenses, food, clothing, heating, coal, all of it purchased at inflated prices with that scrip, those expenses usually exceeded your take-home. So the debt grew, month after month, year after year, and once you were tagged, the company could refuse to let you leave." How could they refuse? Legally they couldn't, but practically they could and did. If you tried to leave camp with an outstanding debt, company guards at the train station or the road checkpoints would turn you back. The company claimed you were attempting to defraud them. Some men who insisted on leaving found themselves arrested on company warrants, prosecuted in company towns by company-friendly judges. The legal system bent to protect capital. Sarah looked at the photograph again. James Hewitt standing outside his company house, his numbered tag displayed like a brand, his wife and child beside him. The portrait they paid $2 to preserve. A record of their family, a record of their bondage. How common was this? She asked. Common enough that it was mentioned in union organizing materials and congressional testimony, but most companies denied it publicly, said it was exaggerated by outside agitators, and very few photographs survive showing the tags in use because companies confiscated cameras from union organizers and journalists. This image is extraordinary because it exists at all. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks building out the context. She drove to McDowell County, following Route 52 through the towns that had once thrived on coal, Welch, Keystone, Kimball, and now sat partially abandoned, the mines closed, the population a fraction of what it had been. The site of number 12 camp was barely recognizable, foundations of houses visible beneath overgrowth, a rusted tipple, the structure where coal was sorted and loaded, still standing but collapsing in on itself. She met with a local historian named Evelyn Parsons, a woman in her 80s whose grandfather had worked in the mines. Evelyn ran a small museum in Welch dedicated to preserving coal camp memory. When Sarah showed her the photograph, Evelyn's reaction was immediate. "The tag," she said quietly. "My grandfather told me about those. He called them slave tags." "Did he have to wear one?" "For 3 years. He said it was worse than the work itself, the shame of it, everyone knowing you couldn't pay your way." Evelyn pulled out a ledger she had inherited from her grandfather's belongings, a personal account book where he had meticulously tracked every purchase, every payday, every deduction. She opened it to a page from 1914. The entries showed a cycle of perpetual deficit: wages credited, $2.40, rent deducted, $0.75, store debt deducted, $1.95, scrip issued, $0, balance owed to company, $1.30 carried forward to next pay period. Week after week the debt climbed, 10 cents here, 20 cents there, small amounts that accumulated into an inescapable weight. "How did he finally get out?" Sarah asked. "He didn't. He died in a roof fall in 1921. My grandmother and her children were evicted from the camp 3 days later. The company said she still owed $42 on his account." Sarah returned to her office and began pulling archival records from other institutions. She found congressional testimony from 1913, when a Senate subcommittee investigated conditions in the West Virginia coalfields after a series of violent strikes. Miners described the tag system in detail. One testified that he had been tagged for 8 years, unable to save enough to leave, forbidden from seeking work at competing mines because the tag marked him as an economic fugitive. She found coroner's reports, miners who died underground with numbered tags still pinned to their clothes, the tags carefully inventoried alongside personal effects to be returned to the company rather than to families. She found legal records, contract clauses that bound miners to work until their debts were satisfied, court rulings that upheld company authority to restrict worker movement, a legal architecture that treated debt as a form of servitude. And she found resistance, records from the United Mine Workers of America organizing campaigns in the 1920s. Union materials explicitly condemned the tag system as a violation of basic human dignity. Lists of demands that included the abolition of scrip, the elimination of debt identification practices, and the right to shop at independent stores. The company's own records, preserved in a university archive in Virginia, showed internal memos acknowledging the tag system. Superintendent reports casually mentioning the number of tagged workers in each camp. Financial statements calculating debt as an asset, money owed to the company that could be leveraged against future labor. What emerged was a system that functioned like slavery by another name, not chattel slavery, where people were bought and sold outright, but debt slavery, where economic chains replaced physical ones, where the illusion of free labor concealed a reality of permanent bondage, where a numbered tag sewn to a jacket marked a man as property of the Pocahontas Fuel Company, as surely as a brand marked enslaved people as property of plantation owners a generation earlier. The photograph of James Hewitt and his family was not an anomaly. It was evidence of a system that operated across the coal fields, affecting thousands of miners and their families, sanctioned by law and protected by power. Sarah prepared a detailed research summary and requested a meeting with the Historical Society's Board of Directors. She brought the photograph, her documentation, and a proposal. She wanted to build an exhibition around this image, to use it as a centerpiece for examining the scrip system, the tag system, and the broader structure of economic exploitation that defined coal country. The meeting took place on a Wednesday afternoon in a conference room overlooking the Kanawha River. 8 board members, the executive director, and Sarah. She projected the photograph on the screen and walked them through her findings. She explained the tag, the debt system, the legal mechanisms that trapped miners. She argued that this photograph was one of the most significant documents in their collection, precisely because it made visible what companies had tried to keep hidden. The response was not unanimous. One board member, a retired banker, raised immediate concerns. "This is an interpretation," he said. "We don't know for certain that the tag represents what you're claiming. It could be a union badge. It could be a work identification number." "The union didn't exist in this camp until 1920, Sarah countered. "And work identification tags were stamped on metal tokens, not sewn to clothing." Still, this feels like we're pushing a political narrative. Coal companies employed thousands of people. They built communities. We shouldn't reduce that history to accusations of slavery. Another board member, a lawyer whose family had owned coal interests, spoke more carefully. "I'm not disputing your research, Sarah, but we need to consider how this will be received. We have donors whose grandparents and great-grandparents ran these companies. If we mount an exhibition that explicitly compares the coal industry to slavery, we risk alienating significant financial support." The executive director, a woman named Patricia Holbrook who had led the society for a decade, stepped in. "Our mission is to preserve and interpret West Virginia history. That includes difficult history. If we shy away from that, we're failing in our responsibility." "But we also have a responsibility to be balanced," the banker argued, "to present multiple perspectives." "There's no balance between exploitation and dignity," Sarah said, her voice sharper than she intended. "This photograph shows a man forced to wear a marker of his indebtedness. That's not a matter of perspective. That's a documented practice that we can verify through company records, legal testimony, and personal accounts. If we don't name it for what it was, we're participating in the same erasure that let it continue for decades." The room fell quiet. Patricia looked around the table. "Let's be clear about what's at stake here. We have an opportunity to tell a story that has been buried, to center the experiences of working people who had no power to control their own narratives when these photographs were taken. If we refuse to do that because it makes donors uncomfortable, we're admitting that money matters more to us than truth." The vote was 5-3 in favor of moving forward with the exhibition, not unanimous, but enough. Sarah spent the next 6 months developing the exhibition with support from Martin Reeves and a team of graduate students. They titled it, "Marked Debt, Labor, and Control in the Coal Fields." The Hewitt family photograph served as the centerpiece, enlarged to 4 feet wide, mounted on a wall with accompanying text that explained the tag system in clear, unsparing language. They surrounded it with supporting documents, payroll ledgers showing negative balances, company store account books tracking debts over years, legal contracts that bound miners to continue working until debts were satisfied, congressional testimony, union organizing materials, personal letters from miners describing the shame and desperation of the system. And they found descendants. Through genealogical records and outreach in McDowell County communities, they located a great-granddaughter of James Hewitt. Her name was Angela Mitchell. She lived in Charleston, worked as a nurse, and had only vague family stories about her great-grandfather's mining work. When Sarah showed her the photograph, Angela went very still. "I never knew what he looked like," she said quietly. Sarah pointed to the tag, explained what it meant. Angela's reaction was complex, anger, certainly, at the system that had trapped her ancestor, at the companies that had profited from that entrapment, but also something like relief. "My whole life, I heard whispers in my family that he died in debt," she said, "like it was a moral failing, like he was irresponsible. Now I understand it wasn't his fault. It was impossible. The system was built so he couldn't win." The exhibition opened in September. Local media covered it extensively. Regional newspapers ran features. A documentary filmmaker reached out, interested in expanding the story. But the most significant response came from visitors. People who had grown up in coal camps brought their own family photographs. Many had never looked closely at the details. Now, with the Hewitt photograph as a reference, they started to see tags in their own images. Small metal rectangles they had always assumed were mine identification or union pins, numbers that marked their grandfathers and great-grandfathers as property of the company. One woman in her 70s spent an hour in front of the exhibition, tears streaming down her face. When Sarah approached, the woman showed her a photograph of her father. He wore a tag numbered 4521. "He never talked about it," the woman said. "I asked him once why he had that pin on his jacket in all the old pictures. He told me it was nothing, just a number. But it wasn't nothing, was it?" "No," Sarah said. It wasn't nothing. The exhibition also drew criticism. The West Virginia Coal Association issued a statement calling it one-sided and historically misleading. A letter to the editor in a regional newspaper accused the Historical Society of attacking the coal industry for political purposes. One former donor withdrew their annual contribution. But the Society's membership actually increased. Younger members, people interested in labor history, educators looking for materials to teach about economic justice. The exhibition traveled to 2 other regional museums. Academic papers cited it. A chapter about the tag system, using the Hewitt photograph as evidence, appeared in a book about debt peonage in industrial America. And the photograph itself changed. Not physically, but in how it could be seen. For decades, it had existed as a simple family portrait, a miner, his wife, his child, a document of ordinary working life. Now, it was evidence. Proof that the script system and debt bondage that miners had testified about in congressional hearings and union organizing materials were not exaggerations. They were real. They were documented. They were literally visible, sewn onto the clothing of men who posed for family portraits, wearing their bondage like a badge. The federal government eventually acted. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 included provisions that outlawed script wages and required employers to pay in U.S. currency. Subsequent legislation strengthened protections for workers' freedom of movement and restricted company control over employee debt. The tag system and the debt bondage it represented were formally ended, though enforcement was uneven and many practices persisted in modified form for years. By then, James Hewitt was long dead. The 1920 census listed him. The 1930 census did not. Sarah found a brief death notice in a 1927 newspaper. No details. Just a name, an age, and a note that he was survived by a wife and son. She never found out if he died still wearing the tag. Photographs lie by what they leave out. The Hewitt family portrait looked like a straightforward document of working life because that was what viewers expected to see. The composition was unremarkable. The setting was familiar. The subjects were ordinary people, not notable enough for detailed captions or careful preservation. For a century, this photograph could have been filed away with thousands of others, a generic example of coal country domesticity. But photographs also tell the truth when you learn how to read them. The tag on James Hewitt's jacket was not hidden. It was right there, in clear focus, reflecting the photographer's light. The photographer saw it. James Hewitt knew he was wearing it. His wife knew. Anyone who looked at this portrait in 1915 would have known what that tag meant, even if they did not speak it aloud. The photograph did not change. What changed was the willingness to see what had always been visible. In archives across Appalachia, thousands of similar photographs wait to be re-examined. Mining families posed outside company houses, workers standing in groups at tipples, Sunday school classes at company churches. How many of those images contain similar markers of bondage that have gone unnoticed because we assumed we already understood what we were looking at? Every photograph is a choice. A decision about what to record and what to exclude, who to center and who to erase. For too long, the choice has been to see these images as neutral documents of industrial progress, to frame coal companies as benevolent employers, to treat miners' poverty and debt as personal failures rather than systemic conditions. The tag on James Hewitt's jacket demands a different choice. It asks us to look closer, to question the narratives we have been taught, to recognize that documentation of exploitation has been hiding in plain sight. And it reminds us that the people who wore those tags, who lived under that system, who bore the weight of debts they could never repay, they deserve to have their reality named honestly. They were not free, they were marked. And now, finally, their bondage is visible.